Welcome, everyone, to Standing on My Soapbox, a Left to Straight podcast production. Today we're talking religion with Father Ethan Jewett, an Episcopal priest who preaches love, acceptance, and positivity. So step right up, join me on my soapbox, and let's start talking.
All right, everyone. Today, standing beside me on my soapbox, I'm excited to welcome a truly unique and inspiring individual to our podcast. The Reverend Ethan Jewett is here, also popularly known as Father Ethan. Father Ethan stands out as a beacon of progressive spirituality and inclusivity, embodying an exceptional blend of faith, fitness, and advocacy. As an ordained minister, Father Ethan has navigated a complex path of being an out gay man in religious leadership, transforming his journey into a source of strength and inspiration for others. Beyond his clerical duties, he's also a fitness enthusiast and coach known as the Jack Priest on social media, where he shares his journey of spiritual and physical wellness. Through his work, Father Ethan strives to bridge the gap between spirituality and the LGBTQ community, advocating for acceptance, love, and understanding. Take a look.
I told you we needed more glitter.
It's down, but now I'm up. Yeah. It's all God, this ain't no.
And say that shit with you.
For it all.
One of the best things that I can do is show myself with the greatest honesty and authenticity so that others will be encouraged to do the same. There's nothing wrong with being fully human. And so for people who have these outmoded stereotypes about the clergy, all I have to say is don't follow my account if you find it objectionable. I'm going to do me. You can do you. And as always, I'm going to wish all of you God's peace.
Well, Father Ethan, welcome to Standing on My Soapbox. I appreciate you coming on, my friend. How are we doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me today.
I'm excited to have you. I've been following you on social media for a while there, and I finally was able to reach out, and we found a time to get together here. So thanks for sharing your story, your advocacy. I mean, amazing story it is. You've done so much through your life, through your work, and I appreciate you taking the time, my friend.
No worries. Thanks so much.
I always like to get a little background from your listeners. Talk to me a little about where you grew up and what kind of a kid were you growing up?
So I grew up in Tampa, Florida in the 1980s. I was raised in a Jewish household and grew up in the conservative branch of Judaism, and that was a very nourishing place for me. But I also grew up in a very abusive household. And I actually had a pretty traumatic experience when I was 16 in the synagogue. There was a group of elderly congregants who have been with the congregation since its founding, and they were told by the new rabbi they were no longer welcome to worship there because they couldn't afford to pay the dues. And I was so heartbroken, and that just seemed so callous. And so I entered a period of a crisis of faith and wandered away from religion for about maybe 15, 20 years. And then came back to religion in my early 30s when I came out and I started dating this guy. And he said, you know, Ethan, I'm a nice Irish Roman Catholic boy from the south side of Chicago. Either you find us an Episcopal church like you've been threatening, or we're going Catholic. And I'm like, well, we're not going Catholic with this thing going on. So I went ahead and I found this small little suburban congregation about 5 minutes from where I was working at the time. And I landed in the parish, and it was so welcoming. And I was really surprised at how welcoming people were early in the 2000s. And I remember speaking to the priest at the time, and he asked me for my contact information. And I said to him, well, you know, I think Mike gave you his contact information. We're a couple, we live together. He's like, well, duh, I figured. And I was just so delighted by that. I think, okay, he's probably cool then. And so I just kind of hit the ground running from that moment and rediscovered my call to ordination, which I had felt as a young Jewish kid, and just came back to life. And I felt the congregation calling me into religious leadership as an ordained person. And so started the process of going through what we call discernment for ordination as a priest in the Episcopal Church. And I was, baptized, confirmed, and then went into the ordination process pretty shortly thereafter.
I love that. That's an amazing story. And talk about your relationship with being gay early on. When did you kind of first started coming out to yourself, and where do you feel you kind of finally started finding your LGBTQ tribe?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it came on me gradually. My mom says that she knew when I was like 5. Moms always seem to know.
Moms
And
always know.
And I'm a total mama's boy, still am. My mom and I are very, very close. And I think I first really realized it in junior high. And you asked about what it was like growing up. I was a skinny, effeminate, very traumatized child. I was bullied at home. I was bullied at school. And so I really had a hard time adjusting to this discovery of my sexuality. I was in denial about it for a while and then kind of accepted it in college, and then got married to a woman who was my college sweetheart, and then got divorced and came out definitively. And I really do credit her with getting me to a place in terms of my own sense of identity to give me the strength to come out. So I really owe her a debt of gratitude.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's we always have someone in our life that kind of is that first accepting person that kind of really helps pave the way for everything else. So that's amazing. I'm glad to hear that. Well, talk about, I mean, you're going to church now through the Jewish faith till you're 16, which is quite a long time for a lot of people. And now you're back into it. Talk about that time in between, though. Did you miss the religion? Did you miss having that kind of a faith or a relationship with some kind of a higher power? Was it totally out of your head for a while?
I think I was probably nominally agnostic. I think I still considered myself Jewish, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I'm not ethnically Jewish. My mom remarried a Jewish guy when I was in kindergarten, I think. And so I was just raised in the Jewish faith. And when I left, I think I still really valued that part of my upbringing. Um, and I tried to find answers to the big questions of life in other ways. So I went to graduate school. I was in a PhD program in French literature at the University of Chicago, and I was very interested in Enlightenment philosophy, the great philosophers of the 18th century, Diderot, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire. And I think I tried to ask those deep philosophical questions. And I don't think that it was entirely satisfying for me, because I felt that although it did teach me a disciplined intellect, it really wasn't feeding the soul. And it really wasn't until, like I say, in my early 30s that I was ready to embrace religion again. And I actually credit that transition to my best friends in college. I had 2 guys, both gay, that I went to college with. And I remember before I left for France to take on a Fulbright teaching fellowship, they took me to the cathedral in the Diocese of Western Michigan. And I was in this building, and there was a round altar, and there was a woman priest celebrating the Eucharist, saying Mass. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And it had an impact on me that I didn't realize right away. I think it's something that planted a seed in me that then blossomed later. And so I credit them with educating me about the spirituality of the Episcopal Church, as well as its social justice commitments around things like LGBTQ rights, the ordination of women, immigrant rights, social justice issues generally, the environment, things of that nature, which really resonated with my own values. And so when I came to the Episcopal Church in 2003, 2004, I felt like I was either going to have to become a Buddhist or an Episcopalian. And I happened to land in the Episcopal Church. And that's been a good place for me by and large. So, that really found its origins way back when I was, 20 years old or 21 years old in college.
Well, and give me the timeline because I don't know the timeline, but it seems like even in the back of your mind, you always had this spirituality and giving back. You worked for nonprofits for a very long time. I don't know if that was before you were ordained or after. And like I said, you had the Fulbright scholarship, which means you're not a dumb person by any means. You kind of had all this stuff going on. It seems like you always were trying to live some kind of a best life possible and also give back. So how does that timeline kind of coalesce with everything else you've been doing?
So that's a great question. I have had what people have described as a very meandering career. So I was in graduate school to become a French professor, and then I decided that it was too monastic an environment for me. It was also a bit too cutthroat and amoral for my taste. And so I eventually left my doctoral work, and I got a temp job at a physician organization. And I worked for a wonderful woman there who's still my best friend. And uh, she said to me, if you're interested in making this a career, I'm hiring a new staff person. Would you like to apply? And I thought, well, I don't really know what I'm doing with this graduate program. Maybe I'll do that for a couple of years until I decide what I want to be when I grow up. And I was there 10 years and really enjoyed that work, learning child advocacy, health services research, health policy. I did a lot of that, published in medical journals, and then left for seminary in 2009 for 3 years. Got my seminary degree, my Master of Divinity, was ordained, took up my first ordained post at a parish in Philadelphia. That was a very toxic environment. And so I left there, came back to Chicago to the place that I had left to go to seminary and worked there for 2 years. Also a very difficult position. And then went back into full-time parish work. And then in the pandemic, I went into nonprofit management as an executive director. So I led a Latinx social services agency right outside of Chicago, did that for a couple of years, and then moved to Philadelphia for my partner, and then took on the executive director of a mental health nonprofit that serves college-age students. So I think the common thread throughout all of that is I've always felt called to a life of service and justice. And so all of these roles, whether it's working for a big nonprofit doing policy, or working as a priest in the Episcopal Church, or working in a mental health nonprofit, or working as a personal trainer, or my Instagram following, all of that stuff has an eye towards social justice and equity.
I love that. Now, thank goodness we have so many more affirming churches besides Episcopalian and Methodist has kind of got a little bit. We have, of course, Universalist, Unitarian, that have, but talk about even within those groups, there's some people that aren't quite there with the LGBTQ. What was your first kind of blowback in your attempt to kind of to solidify more yourself in the church and some of the blowback against it?
Okay, so I'm going to share something a little personal. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
But I think the first time when I really thought this could be a problem was when I was going through what I mentioned was the discernment process. And at that point in the ordination process, you have people from your home church and some neighboring churches who evaluate your suitability for ordination. They ask you about your academic preparation, your spiritual life, your finances, pretty much everything to evaluate whether you're really equipped to take on this life as a priest. And I was dating, as I mentioned, this nice Irish Roman Catholic boy at the time. And we were out one night at the clubs, and we had ended up at this after hours club in Chicago, and we were dancing and we had our shirts off, and we were doing what you normally do. And I got reported for it. And it was considered to be, oh, that's too risque. How dare you as a priest? How are you going to model, wholesomeness and modesty and the rest of it? And I thought, well, I'm a gay man with a boyfriend and I was dancing with him. That's what you do at 4 a.m. at Charlie's, And I was just really bothered by that. And my parish priest said to me when my process blew up, said, well, Ethan, you don't have to be a priest if you feel this call to live authentically as a gay man. And I said, but I do feel called to a priest. And then he said, then you have to figure out a way to do both, to hold those in tension, because the church with a capital C is not going to figure that out for you, and they're not there. And in a lot of ways, things have progressed since that time. But I also think that the church, even progressive denominations such as mine, are still extremely heteronormative. And they still expect queer people to conform to the norms of straight, cis, monogamous, fill in the blank people. And this whole notion like, well, queer people are just like straight people. Not true. Not true at all. That is a very assimilationist and essentializing gambit that basically says, well, queer experience doesn't really matter. You don't get to define yourself. You just get to assimilate into the dominant culture, because that's the price of getting equal rights, right? Marriage equality and the rest of it. And that's something that I have always fought. This notion that, well, in order to be accepted, whether in the church or in society at large, you have to conform and stop being who you are.
Well said. I love that's a weird experience. And who is there that's pointing you out? What are they part of the church? Who's reporting you and pointing you out? That's what I want to know.
Okay, so I'll spill the tea on that one, Scott. So it turns out that the person who did report me was a gay man himself in his 60s or 70s, had been married for most of his life to a woman, had kids, and he was there at the club and saw us. And my read on it is that it was a bit of sour grapes. Well, how dare you get to live out your dream as a young person when I missed out? And so therefore it was a bit of bad grace. It said, well, how dare you? And, my view was like, well, look, we are from different generations. I've had certain opportunities that you have not had, and I'm grateful for them, and I'm sad that you did not have them.
Right.
But it's not your place to tell me what kind of person I should be. And I did not think I was doing anything wrong by just being authentically myself. And it's funny how the church, and I would say straight folks in general, interpret things, because they are really not initiated into gay culture to know how to interpret the way we live our life. They jump to fanciful conclusions about what this represents. And that was certainly the case in my process. Now, the second time I went through the process, it was actually challenging, but pretty effortless. I mean, I felt it was fair, and I think the church did well in evaluating me and came to the right conclusion and were supportive. But there's always been this tension around, well, we want the gays to come, absolutely, come one, come all, but not if you're too freaky. I mean, not if you're into leather, or you're a go-go boy, or you're a dykes on bikes or something. That's a little too much for us. And my position of what has always been, look, if you're going to invite the gays to come to church, you've got to be prepared to accept them on their terms, not on yours. And it's a very wide tent, and you're going to get a wide range of people and experiences and relationship configurations. And are you really prepared to that? Don't overpromise and underdeliver.
Well, exactly. And it's like, how do you say on one hand, all are welcome in our church except for you, and you, and you, who do this, and this? It's like,
right.
Well, I don't understand that contradiction. Let's look on the other side of the looking glass, though, and now talk to me about your gay friends and how they perceive the church. How are we able to reconcile that? Do you get a lot of blowback from that side of the spectrum?
That's the answer is going to probably surprise you a bit, because there are an enormous number of queer people in the Episcopal Church in particular. There are a lot of queer clergy. There are a lot of gay boys in Episcopal churches, particularly the higher ones with the bells and incense, pretty much what I do. I do all that high church stuff. And, I would say that the gay or queer presence in the Episcopal Church is very high. Now, having said that, of course, I run into people on social media and out in the gay community at large who will say, how can you belong to a religion that hates gay people. And I always respond by saying, well, I want to challenge your underlying assumption that the church hates gay people, or that Jesus said anything at all about gay people, which he did not, or what the Bible says about homosexuality, which is highly problematic and is rooted in received interpretations of those scriptures that are not culturally based,
Right.
are rather simplistic and even, I'll say it, ignorant and uneducated interpretations of scripture. So there are a lot of people who make assumptions about what Christianity stands for, and even my own brand of Christianity in terms of the Episcopal Church. And so I have to do some deconstructing of their assumptions and say, well, tell me why you say that. I'm pretty honest about what I think the tensions or challenges within the institutional church, what those challenges are, but they're not necessarily the ones that I get taxed with by others. So for me, it's more about the fact that I think queer people, because we're becoming more, because we're becoming more accepted, and I think we're asserting ourselves more, and public opinion is changing, we're pushing the boundaries even within the church of what's supposed to be acceptable. So we're not accepting second-class citizen status or conformity or assimilation. We're saying, you know what? This is 2024. The church has to do better. Like, are we going to be honest about what's really going on here? Or are we going to pretend that queer people are living double lives, or they're living as straight people? Because they're not.
I love that. And talk to me about your first 2 or 3 sermons. How was that to kind of gear up towards those? And what did you talk about your first couple times up on the pulpit?
Well, I had, in some ways, a kind of an unconventional preparation as a preacher. The congregation that I originally landed in, that I told you about, the priest there was extraordinarily progressive, and he engaged me, actually corralled me pretty heavily into lay preaching, and even as a new Christian. He said, well, you're smart, and this is a good way for you to explore your new faith, and I can work with you on your sermons. And so I started preaching long before I was ordained, many years before I was ordained. But I remember one moment in those years before I was ordained, when the priest said to the children of the congregation, can you remember a sermon from this past year that was really impactful, or that really stuck out to you? And the sermon that the children remembered was my sermon about coming out, which was so beautiful to me. I thought, wow, like, it resonated. And of all the good preaching that happened in that congregation, and the priest was an excellent preacher, that's the one that they remembered. And I remember the first sermon that I heard in that church, I came during Lent in 2004, and he was preaching on the spirituality of fairy tales. And I thought, this guy is so fascinating. Like, he was a Jungian analyst and an Episcopal priest, and he created these narratives that were so powerful and creative and innovative that I was just hooked. And he portrayed Jesus in such a way that I realized that this was a God I wanted to worship, because this is a God who had a disproportionate love and care for the marginalized, for the forgotten, for the despondent, for the rejected. And that's a God that I wanted to serve.
That is absolutely amazing. Let's get into the fitness aspect of it and the Jack Priest. I mean, you've been into fitness way before you were into being ordained, right? So this was a lifestyle that you've already kind of cultivated just for your own personal growth, right? You talked about being bullied earlier. You talked about feeling you were kind of a small and scrawny kid. So you use this as a way to personally build up your own personal power, right? And give some confidence and things like that. When did you feel you wanted to kind of blend it with your spiritual beliefs?
So as I said, I was bullied when I was young, and I discovered lifting when I was in college. I wandered into the college weight room, and I saw these big dudes lifting, and I was athletic as a kid. I did not do well at team sports. I didn't really have a dad, and I didn't know how to play. And I was also small, and I didn't want to play football with these hulking brutes. This was not fun for me. And so I was often, embarrassed and and picked on for just being bad at sports. So when I wandered into the weight room and I discovered that I could be athletic and set goals for myself, and that I had a certain amount of agency to control how I looked and was able to build my confidence, that was very addictive. And so what I discovered at 18 has been my constant companion throughout my life. And I'm 52 now, so that's been 34 years that I've been lifting. And what really changed for me in terms of the question that you asked about blending my ministry and my fitness and my advocacy came from my work in parish ministry. I was moving from being full-time to part-time. And I realized that I really wanted to become a personal trainer. It'd always been a bucket list item for me to learn how to do things properly, to learn the science behind it all, to go through a methodical program. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go part-time as a priest. So I'll get my personal trainer certification and maybe I'll craft that into a full-time business and then cobble together a livelihood. And so I did that. And I got my certification in October of 2019. And I got a job at a very posh gym in Chicago at an Equinox. And then the pandemic happened. And so I was like, okay, well, so I started training people in my condo, guys that I knew from the Stonewall kickball team that my partner was on at the time. So I knew, I had been part of the gay scene for a long time. I knew a lot of people. I knew people in the Stonewall Sports League. And so I just had friends that were part of that network. And I had several of them who said, yeah, why don't you train me in your condo? So we did that during the pandemic. And then I got another job at a gym when the gyms opened back up. And then I realized I wasn't making enough money. And so that's when I went to become a nonprofit CEO. But fitness has always been a lifelong passion of mine. And I think to bring this rather long and rambling story to conclusion, I feel like one of the things that the church has really done wrong is to stigmatize the human body. There's a lot of fear, guilt, and shame around the body because the body is so powerful. So therefore, it's hard for the church to control it, which is why I think over the centuries, the church has stigmatized bodies generally. The flesh is weak and sinful. The spirit is all that matters. That's some messed up theology, right? And it's accounted for people feeling really crappy about themselves. And I just feel that that's a sin that the church needs to atone for and make right. And so one of the ways that I try to do that is by saying, you know what? The body is not an inherently sinful thing. The body is beautiful. It's part of God's creation. We should not be stigmatizing it. We should not wrap it up in 50 layers of clothing because it's something shameful that needs to be hid away. We should take pride, particularly if we've put a lot of effort into crafting our physique over many years. There's nothing wrong with being fully human and taking pride in one's achievements. And I would say that the same is true for people of any body type, not just people who are really fit or really into fitness, but people of any body type. So it really is about, again, empowerment and building self-esteem.
And I think there's a difference between sinful pride and pride in yourself. I think we all need to have pride in ourselves and accomplishments, right? And talk about that kind of difference between faithful pride and pride in accomplishment.
Sure. I mean, as you could probably guess, I have been accused of so many things. You're narcissistic. Aren't you supposed to be modest? You're a priest. Blah, 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 blah. And see, I just think that modesty is a euphemism for body shame, for body hatred. And so for me, the way I look at it, Scott, is that in order to normalize a healthy attitude towards the body, we have to change our behavior towards it. And we have to change the way that we present it to the world. And so for me, the issue of pride and vanity and the rest of it is really about when you think yourself, to quote St. Paul, to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. That is to say, to think that you're better than everybody else, that the entire universe revolves around you. I don't think that's true of me. I mean, I think I'm subject probably to the same human frailties as anybody else. But I also realize that I've given myself to a life of service. I've made sacrifices for that purpose. And so if people can't look at my life in the aggregate and see a good person, then that's really their issue. I have plenty of faults. I'm in therapy, right? I try to better myself, as I think a lot of people do, but I'm not going to take other people's baggage onto myself as mine, because it's not mine. That's other people's projections, and they're unhealthy projections. Yeah.
I think that's great. And I think it also opens up to an entirely new set of conversations, right? You might get people that will come out and start speaking to you that would never even think about the religious side of it or the philosophy side of it, and might open up different people that would never have a conversation with a priest to talk about spiritual things in the course of a workout or through something, or just from getting to know someone through their making themselves a better person, right? Talk about those. Have you had those kind of revelations with people?
I have had more revelations than I can possibly count. And one of the most extraordinary things, I think, Scott, are the messages that I get literally every day from people on Instagram who say, I am just so blown away. I have been tortured by my gay identity because of my religious background. And you've shown me that it's possible to be a person of faith and a gay person. I also get a lot of messages from trans folk. And I try to respond to absolutely every DM that I get. I may not be able to say, have long conversations with everybody, but I want to acknowledge those people who do reach out and want to share something important. And I think what's really noteworthy to me is how much of a thirst there is for affirmation, for a way to do exactly what my priest originally charged me to do, which was to find a way to hold those things together, to be a person of faith and to be a queer person as well, and to live both with integrity. And that's hard to do very often.
Yeah.
And of course, I take risks doing this. I'm sure I'm used to being in trouble with the ecclesiastical authorities. I hope I won't be in the future, but I probably will be for pushing things too far or what have you. But I really do think that it's important for people to take some risks and to step out of their comfort zones and to really talk about the issues that matter in a way that's going to be impactful for people. And so to try to keep everything polite and anodyne is not going to really help. And I will go there. And sometimes the church gets mad at me because I push the envelope a little too far, and I'll tell it like it is. And I will criticize my own denomination for being hypocritical or not being progressive enough when they say, oh, we want everybody. I'm like, well, but look at what you're doing. Like, are you really living out your promise to people? I don't think so. You can do better.
That's why I want you to stand on the soapbox with me, because I agree the same thing. I mean, we all have to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and kind of see what's out there. So very good. And I appreciate you doing that. And plus, I mean, talk about the power of social media. You can talk to a congregation of 100 to 300 people at a church, and you can talk to thousands on social media. You not only do your workout and fitness things, you talk about faith, you talk about different parts of it. What kind of, I mean, just talk about the reach. Do they understand what that kind of preaching, the reach can be in social media?
Yes, I think they do. I think that's one of the things that might make them nervous. But my view is, look, the church as we know it is dying because the church is not relevant. It's not embracing people where they are. And so what does the church have to lose? And in my mind, I think I'm really a really good advertisement for the church. I think it's, as much as I criticize the Episcopal Church, for instance, I love the Episcopal Church. I love being an Episcopal priest. I think that we have something really unique to offer people. And the reason that I challenge the Episcopal Church is because I think it has so much potential to do good and to be a place that is different from other options, right? That perhaps aren't open enough or not welcoming enough or not progressive enough. And it's not just about being welcoming to people. I think we've done the theology. we've thought through a lot of these issues. I think it's just going to take courage from leadership at the top to really accept that the church has to change. And so, I try to be an advocate for the Episcopal Church as well as being its critic.
And it's exactly what you said. Churches are dying off. We've had so many. I mean, this is a very Italian. I'm in Youngstown area of Ohio, and it's very Italian. Lots of churches on every corner, lots of different religions, but we're closing down churches left, right, and center. If the Catholic Church is combining, everyone's combining things, because I think people are not necessarily getting away from religion, but understanding what it means to be preached at than preach to, right? I think there's a big difference in that. I think someone can preach at you and talk about everything you're doing wrong, or preach to you and talk about how we can lift each other up, right?
And I actually like to say preach with. So, for example, the way I preach in my congregation, I don't preach with a manuscript. I don't have, piece of paper to read. I preach from the aisle, and I ask them questions. So sometimes it's the only opportunity that I have to do theological reflection with them, but I want to stimulate their own theological imaginations and help them to connect the dots between various things, between what we say we believe as followers of Jesus and also as people who live in the world. And I do that because I would rather the sermon be something that we create together, right? And so that's a more equitable model. Not that there's anything wrong with traditional preaching. I do some of that too, but on a normal Sunday, there will be a give and take, a back and forth between the congregation and me, because I do feel like this is a life that we're living together, and so we should craft our narrative together and process these issues together. And I serve an all-Black congregation in West Philly as a white priest, and so it's a very nourishing and rich experience for me, as I hope it is for them too. That's one of the ways that I think people can expand themselves, is to inhabit a system that's not their own, a culture that's not their own. So I've served a Latino congregation, I've served a Black congregation, I've served suburban and urban congregations with a large homeless population. And all of those experiences have taught me something really important. And I think if we could do that a lot more, there would be a lot more harmony in the world and a lot more humility too.
I agree 100%. I'm so excited. I'm doing a big road trip this summer, and I'm raising some money for some centers. And so one of the centers I looked at is the Bayard Rustin LGBTQ Resource Center in Akron, Ohio. And it's primarily serves the Black community in Akron and everything. And it's my first time working with some of it. And I'm learning so much great things and seeing so much pride in this community. That's just an amazing thing that I've never reached out to before. And you're kind of a little bit ashamed at it, but a little bit excited at the same time, right? To kind of learn these new cultural differences. It's exciting.
Where are you going? Do you have
I'm taking a road trip from Northeast Ohio to Palm Springs to do a month of live shows from Palm Springs.
Wow.
So I'm stopping in Chicago, Omaha, Denver, and Las Vegas on the way, and kind of just talking about love and equality and acceptance and everything. And I'm calling it the Big Gay Road Trip, driving towards equality. And it should be an exciting time. I really want to be able to do to make a difference and to raise some money for these pride centers, one here in Akron and one in Palm Springs. So I'm excited.
Well, it has to be a big gay road trip if you end up in Palm Springs. I mean,
it had to be, right?
Right.
And doing the live interviews from the pool, and
there you go.
And I don't say it often, but it's a clothing optional all male resort I'm doing it from. But that's okay. We'll be closed when we're doing it. We're good.
No shame in that.
No body shaming, right?
No.
Exactly. So yeah, but just I think you're right. Learning different communities and stuff, and I am so thankful for the Bayard Rustin Center for partnering with me in this and letting me learn their culture and kind of helping me share this culture with everyone else as well. That's always there, but something that I have not opened myself up to enough. So I can imagine the fulfillment you're getting from your community there in Philadelphia. So amazing. Let's talk about and kind of wrap stuff up, and we'll go into some final thoughts, but talk to me about what your goals are for your future in the church and what you want to see happen with your ministry. And if you see it evolving at all, or where do you see kind of yourself in the next 3 to 5 years?
That's really hard to project, Scott. I'll do my best. I think I've never been ambitious in the church. I've never looked to ascend to higher office for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think in many people, not all people, but in many people, it corrupts. And I'm also just a simple parish priest at the end of the day. That's what I value. And I'm happy doing that. So I don't imagine that a lot will change in terms of my parish work. I continue to love to work in nonprofits with a really important mission, and mental health has always been important to me. And then I would say in terms of my Instagram, my social media presence, I think my only real goal is, of course, I want to continue to grow my account because I feel like I have a message out there that's important. And the reason that it's important is because there are so many people who have been told that there's something wrong with them for being queer, either for religious reasons or cultural reasons or what have you. And I cannot tell you how many really vicious messages I get in response to my post from people who are ostensibly Christian or religious, and they say the most hateful things. They call me a child molester. They call me a heretic. They call me, all manner of abominations. And which shows me that for a lot of the world, the dominant messaging around Christianity is that it's one of hate and exclusion. So that creates a sense of urgency for me that, okay, well, if this is the dominant rhetoric about Christianity out there, then I need to oppose it every way that I can. And the more people that I can reach, perhaps the more people I can give comfort to, the more people that I can convince that actually, you know what, you are God's beloved child, and there's nothing wrong with the way God made you. And anybody who tells you different is absolutely wrong, unequivocally wrong, and do not know how to read scripture and do not understand the theology of the church, and is prioritizing the wrong things. It is using holiness and God to justify their really awful prejudices and beliefs. So to the extent that I can give people some comfort by growing my account, I'm going to be very gratified by that. And I hope that people will continue to reach out and to be as authentic as they can be, as I'm trying to do myself. I don't know if I'm always successful,
well
but
said.
I try.
No, I love that. And I think you need to stay where you are. I think we've had enough examples of once you go, I won't call it higher, but once you advance in the church, it becomes a money game all of a sudden, and you're more about making sure the church survives financially. You're not maybe thinking about, I don't know, this is my personal opinion, so that's my soapbox. But I think it's best to be the one to kind of talk about the principles and to be in the upper echelons about paying the bills and everything. So I think it warps your perspective.
Yeah, it warps your perspective. The other thing I'd say, Scott, too, is that the higher up you get in the church, the more there is pressure to not make waves, right? Because you have too much to lose. There's more pressure. The higher your rank is, the more, people expect you to toe the line. And one of the reasons that I don't rely upon the church for my livelihood, why I have this day job, is so I have the freedom to say what I want to say in the way that I want to say it. So that if I were to lose my livelihood in the church or be censured for something, that I can still pay my bills. So it gives me a certain amount of independence in terms of, my values and my, my moral stance on issues that is not always present to queer people in the church who depend on that for their livelihood.
And who made some of the biggest waves? Jesus back in the day, right? So, I mean, I
got
think
crucified
you're
for
supposed
it.
to make waves, right? Isn't that the purpose?
That's my read. Yes.
I love it.
Amen.
Well, normally on my interview shows, Father Ethan, I do like to do 5 questions which are kind of goofy random, but on standing on my soapbox, I kind of like to break it down into 5 takeaways that listeners can listen here. Talk about, for our first takeaway, what do you think religion or spirituality can kind of do to help keep yourself centered and with purpose? What has it done for you to keep yourself centered and have a purpose-driven life?
I think that what religion has done for me is it's helped me to ask better questions about what it means to be fully human and to apply that insight to my daily life. So I have a sense that being a Christian has given me a moral framework for understanding the world and operating within it, which isn't to say that atheists or others can't, but it's been useful for me. I tried that, right? I tried doing that without religion and it didn't work for me. And so having a moral code like that grounded in a theology of love and empowerment and acceptance is really centering for me and kind of is the touchstone that I use to reflect on everything that I do. Is what I'm doing consistent with what I believe? So that would be my first takeaway.
I love that. And second takeaway, what though have you learned is the importance of being yourself and living an authentic life?
Great question. So I used to, back in the day when I was afraid of being censured, I was very careful about bifurcating my gay self and my church self. So my social media, I had separate social media accounts. The churchy one, I only posted like, pictures of me, at the theater or at church or whatever. And I just felt that it lacked integrity and I felt a little dead inside by trying to have to separate those things out. And so I just stopped doing that. It wasn't sustainable for me. I felt bad about myself. And so I just had to say, all right, the proper response to that, how do I structure my life in such a way that I can live with integrity so I don't have to split off parts of myself? And so having a good day job to give me the freedom to do that, it was my solution to that problem, right? I need to be able to support myself. What happens if the church gets mad? Well, okay, if you have this job that allow you to support yourself, then you can be fully yourself. You can take more risks.
I love that. And talk about if you are having a crisis of faith with your authentic self, what do you recommend to people to kind of help give you that guidance? Where did you find that guidance in yourself as you first started coming back to the church?
Well, that's a complicated answer. I'll try to keep it simple. I think therapy is always a good thing for a person of any sort of faith or no faith at all, and that's always been really important for me to provide kind of somebody on the outside to help me see myself and say, like, do you do the same stuff I'm here? And you are really hard on yourself. That's crazy. Like that is not healthy. Okay, okay. And then also, I would say being part of a community, of some kind of community, because I think life is so challenging that it's really difficult to manage it on our own. And even though we have these values as Americans to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and be self-reliant, I think that's kind of a fiction. People are meant to be in community. People are meant to be in relationship with each other. And so whether that's a church or some other sort of community, I think people need that because the community will carry you when you can't carry yourself, or they will provide you some perspective or wisdom that you're not able to find within yourself, particularly when you're in crisis.
I love that. All right, let's do the fourth takeaway here. We talk about the Jack Priest and everything. Talk about body shaming versus body positivity. I mean, just look at you. You give these dates, and I think you're like 32 years old, and that can't be right. So,
No.
first off, the health benefits of working out got to be amazing to begin with. But talk about what's our takeaway in body shaming versus body positivity from a pride perspective. How do you kind of keep that balance, and how do you keep that faith?
Well, I think it's different for everybody, and I don't want to impose my view on folks. But I guess what I would say that's useful is that, as you well know, social media can be a very destructive force because it sets up unrealistic expectations or standards, right? And people feel like they can't measure up. And so I think people need to be on their guard against comparing themselves to other people. I think it's a really tough journey to accept yourself wherever it is that you are. And even for me, I can tell you, I know that I'm in shape. I know that I'm fit. But when I compare myself to 18-year-old Instagram fitness influencers, if I were to do that, I could feel bad about myself, right? Because they're leaner than I am. They're more this. I'm like, well, yeah, when I was 18, I probably, even with good genetics. So I have to remember, even for myself, don't compare yourself to an 18-year-old fitness influencer on Instagram, right? Compare yourself to yourself, where you are
Right.
now, and not necessarily to other 52-year-old men either. But you have to have a solid center. I was once told by a priest friend of mine that telling somebody to have a tougher skin or a thicker skin isn't always helpful, but I think each person can develop a solid center. And so whatever that looks like for an individual, that's what they should pursue. And it could be through fitness, or it could be through diet, or it could be through meditation or therapy or whatever. But people have to come to an acceptance of themselves, body, mind, and soul, not just body, but everything is integrated, right?
Right. Nice. And finally, let's talk about queer relationships, sex, divorce, marriage, all these things, how the church perspective on that hopefully is changing a bit. The people's perspective is not always all the time, but talk about being in a healthy LGBTQ relationship and having a healthy kind of, and when it falls apart, like everyone does, how do we still reconcile that as well?
That's a big question. I will just offer this disclaimer. I am not speaking for the Episcopal Church on this matter. I'm speaking for myself. I did say before that a lot of Christian denominations are still very heteronormative in terms of their sexual ethics. But my personal view is, first of all, I went to a radical seminary, so I can blame them for part of this. But I really do believe that there are a lot of different configurations for healthy relationships. And I think queer people in particular have had to be very creative over the centuries, because for most of our existence, we've been told, you don't fit the norm. You're not a real couple. You're not this. And so queer people said, okay, fine, then we'll come up with something for ourselves that works. And so we get thruples, we get polyamorous relationships of various kinds. We get, we get big generational gaps, right, in couples. We
Right.
get, and there's nothing inherently wrong with any one of those things. And so I think that in a lot of ways, the queer community has a lot of wisdom and insight and experience to share with the world and the church at large about what it looks like to have a healthy gay relationship. And, for me, it's not the actual configuration of the relationship. It's really about the dynamics present, because I would rather, as I have often said, rather controversially, I'd rather, bless a healthy, mutual, polyamorous relationship than to sanction a relationship where the husband is beating the wife or one is cheating on the other, right? As long as the relationship is consensual and free of coercion or violence or abuse, I don't think it's really our place to judge the morality of it. If it works for people and it's life-giving and healthy, then who are we to condemn that? That's my view.
Right. Very well said. Well, Father Ethan Jewett, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you standing beside me on my soapbox today. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again, because it's an amazing story that you've been able to share. Your journey is amazing. And thanks so much for being on the show, my friend.
My pleasure. Godspeed.
Let everyone know real quick where they can find you on social media. And if they happen to be in the Philly area, they might catch you in a sermon.
Yeah, they might. So you can catch me at Jacked Priest on Instagram. And so by all means, follow.
Very, very good. Stay on the line for me. I appreciate it. Guys, you've been listening to Standing on My Soapbox right here on the Left is Straight Podcast Network. We appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to listen to podcasts every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We will be here next week with another topic to talk about right here on our Soapbox. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today, everyone, on another Standing on My Soapbox. A big thank you to my guest, Father Ethan Jewett. Look for this podcast on Fridays right here on the Left is Straight Podcast Network. Be sure to give us a like and a follow, and we'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.